Hey everybody, welcome back to Nikki T Live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Schalk Neethling. Skulk, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for the invitation, Nick.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting about this. We've got a bunch of topics to discuss today: open web, open source, open access, open all things, I guess. Um, but uh, but before we get started, for folks who might not know who you are, would you mind giving like a bit of background? Say as much as you'd like to. How you got into tech, or just currently what you're up to, and then we'll go from there.
Sure thing. So I'm going to condense it. I think I figured out how to condense all the things I did. So I started way back, not as a software engineer, as
Okay,
a lead guitarist for a death metal band called Malfeasant. And
that is amazing. Just to get started,
we
that's amazing.
so that was like when I was 16, 17. When I was 18, we started playing live concerts and we got very close to a record deal, but it was a little early in South Africa for death metal. So most
Okay.
record company was like, what the heck are you doing? Um, so eventually, to further my interest in music, I did classical guitar and I studied music theory. But after, I went as far as being a professional classical guitarist. I was in
Oh, no way.
the Netherlands and Italy playing concerts and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I had a family on growing, wife, and our first kid was on the way. And making money as a classical guitarist was very hard. So um,
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
started doing like graphic design because I was always interested
Okay.
in art and that kind of stuff. So I started doing graphic design, and um, that kind of led me to do some branding work. That's how I discovered Elance when that was still a
Okay.
thing. When they're like, there was this old TV show where they talked about like new things. I think Computer World or something like that. And on there, they interviewed the founders of Elance. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to try it out. So I got some jobs over there. But then I don't know. Somehow the web started being a thing, and I was like, this looks really interesting. And but Java was like the big thing then, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did like a short 6 8 month diploma in Java 2. So that's how long ago it was. Um,
Okay.
and then I started getting some jobs in corporate companies. And the more I started working with this stuff, the more I was like, I don't know if this whole Java thing is for me. It introduced me to the world of open source. I'll always be thankful for that.
Okay.
Back then, it was still, Sun Microsystems and Apache and all that. So it was very open source, not
Yeah.
like when Oracle purchased all the things. But and so eventually, I started venturing into the front end world. And when I did that, I started being introduced to all the open web standards through Jeffrey Zellman and all those good folks.
Okay.
And I completely just fell in love with all of that stuff. And I was like totally into it. Was doing the jQuery thing when that just came out. Like that was a game changer
Yeah.
back in the day. Not having to worry about cross browser. How do you add an event listener? Oh, you don't do add event listener, but attach if it's an IE, all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And the beautiful little dollar sign that is now query selector, pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, so I really enjoyed that, but I was still working at corporate companies, and that just
Okay.
wasn't a fit for me. Like I was pushing open source the whole time; they were pushing back because they need somebody to sue if something goes wrong. So um, and try to do like web standards, and I got super passionate about web accessibility, and again those
Okay.
things weren't seen as priorities or important. And yeah, I was working at this like what do you call it, like a telecoms company, mobile telecoms company,
Okay, yeah.
Vodacom, which is a child sister company, I don't know, Vodafone. um, and I just was fed up. A combination of the work environment, the culture, and just this like accessibility is not important, open source not interested.
Mhm.
And I saw a job opening at Mozilla, which was remote. This is back
Mhm.
in 2011, and I was like, I'm going to apply because I've always looked at Mozilla and like their mission and everything like was so it just sit right with me. Applied for it, did like 3, 4 interviews. There were still three going, but I
Okay.
decided, you know what, I feel like I got this in the bag, so I quit my job before I had that job, which in retrospect was that was ballsy to do that. But
Yeah, yeah.
it worked out. It worked out in the end. I got the job. Started
Oh no,
Mozilla in late
awesome.
Yeah, I started Mozilla in late 2011 when the company was still small-ish. So there were like 200-ish people,
Okay.
um, and absolutely loved it. I was there for almost 12 years. So
Oh, oh, that long. Okay. Wow.
the bulk
That's
of my
amazing.
career was at Mozilla. Um, but the mission and the culture that I fell in love with slowly started eroding over the last 3, 4 years. And um, for the last 4.5 years, I had the immense privilege of working on MDN Web Docs, which was
Okay.
just like everything, like the planets aligned. It's like the
Mm-hmm.
project that I pretty much joined Mozilla for. Now I'm working on it. But yeah, priorities changed because certain things became important in the Mozilla world, and
Yeah.
MDN. It was impacting a lot of stuff on MDN, and I wasn't happy with the way I was going, and I didn't feel that I was in a position to really change that. And
Okay.
so many of my friends from all of the years left, and it just didn't feel like the same place anymore. So I left in late July last year.
Okay.
Um, the idea was to start my own agency. Well, I didn't want to start an agency. I wanted to start as an agency to pay the bills, but then develop a product on the side and eventually sell the product.
Okay.
Again, I chose a time when the world economy was not doing great. I
Yeah.
don't know. I did that once before in my life where I also decided
Yeah.
to try something, and I was like, I'm going to sell advertising, and it was like, um, nobody's interested in paying for advertising.
Yeah.
Um, but and so things just fell apart very quickly, and
Okay.
I was woken up to a lot of things, that just how close me and the family was to not having enough money. It
Okay.
always felt like we were okay, but turns out no. Um, and I was also trying this new thing, community management. I've always loved community. And as part of open source, it's kind of part and parcel of the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you do that as a full-time job, it becomes more of a marketing job than it is really working with the community for the community's sake, the way
Yeah.
I always did it as part of my open source work. So I ended up at Box HQ doing that. It wasn't a good fit. Like it was one of those things where I was desperate. I found the job. It sounded really good, but then when it started, it's like common startup things.
Okay.
They in when was it? April, I think. Yeah, in first week of April, one of the founders approached me and said, "Well, due to investor pressure and things like that, they're pivoting
Okay.
and they're not so much community, not so much open source, more sales, more SaaS. So
Yeah.
I was essentially laid off, and so I had to make a plan. And so yeah, I mean, for the bulk of April, and a bit of May, I was on the hunt, on the prowl for a job, for a new opportunity. And the community thing really really paid off. Like, I'm super super grateful for each and every person that shared the thing on LinkedIn and connected me with people, and that. And I ended up with having two choices. Chose
Mm-hmm.
Factorial, and I joined them on the 21st of May.
Okay.
And I've been there now for, I don't know, it's a 2 3 weeks, and it's amazing. It's absolutely
That's
amazing.
great.
I made the right choice. Brilliant culture fit, and I'm back to engineering, so I'm a senior front end engineer there,
That's
um,
awesome.
and loving it. Absolutely loving it.
Yeah. I love your not backstory, but your what's the yeah, your background story. Like there's a lot of people that I know that are in tech that have musical backgrounds. So, uh, and I don't. I just think it's pretty cool that you were like in like a death metal band, which is it's a great story. And this is like not really what we're discussing today, but like. I speak to a lot of early career devs or people transitioning from another career, And like one of the
Hmm.
things they always say is like my previous career doesn't help my job hunt. And I kind of think it's the opposite. Like obviously if you worked in the food industry, there's like I worked in restaurants, like there's a lot of stuff that translates like time management and stuff, but there's a certain point obviously where you can't really correlate I was flipping burgers and now that's why I can code. But
Hmm.
but it's something to talk about, and it especially if it's an interesting background. Like I guarantee you, regardless of whether you got a job or not, if you were applying to a bunch of places, they would 100% remember, oh yeah, Skulk, death metal guy, like regardless of how
Yeah.
the interview went, and so I always
Hmm.
encourage people to mention, like, there's a I know people don't like small talk necessarily sometimes, but uh, you know, just to break the ice, and it's like a fun story. Like there's somebody in, I'm part of a virtual coffee community, which my coworker Becca, she started that
Yep.
back in 2020, and I've been there pretty much since the beginning. And there's just been a lot of people coming into there, and one of them, I did when I was working at Dev 2, I was doing the live stream over there, and I had a bunch of people that were career changers on. And one of them, well, there's a couple interesting stories, but there was one who is Steve Carroll, who's I believe he's on the look for his next role right now, but he's talking about like he's a literal professional opera singer. And like,
Wow.
one, that's just super cool regardless of whether you like opera or not. Like it's a
Hmm.
cool thing, and I was telling him, just kind of like your death metal thing, like definitely mention that at a interview, because if anything, it's like an interesting conversation piece, like, oh, opera, so why did you decide to go into tech now, or like, and then there was also there's a few people, but Jessica Wilkins, who's also a friend of mine, she works at Free Code Camp now,
Oh,
and
wow.
she's a professional oboist, and she
Wow.
she literally play I don't really watch American football, but she literally played in the NFL Super Bowl orchestra for the Super Bowl. I
Nice.
don't know if not the last one, but I think it was the previous one. And again,
Hmm.
just it's a super cool story. It doesn't matter if you don't like oboes or not. That's just a very interesting thing, and the other thing too, I find, and we'll definitely get to the topics we wanted to talk about
Yeah.
today,
No. No.
but
No.
the thing I found cool is like, to be a musician, you have to study a lot. You have to be able to read sheet music. You're coordinating with all kinds of people. It's almost like, if it's not programming, I know, but it's like, following the notes. You're running a program kind of, and it's like there's a
Hmm. Hmm.
lot of practice that goes into this, and like there's so many skills there that I think, like, obviously if somebody just says like this isn't JavaScript, it's you're reading music, but like my point more is like there's a lot of stuff there, like she put in a lot of time to learn that, and so like to me I could translate that to like she's interested in tech, she's going to put in the time, and she did. And she landed a job at this dot labs for a while, and then now she's over at Free Code Camp, where I think she was volunteering, doing writing there initially, and then Quincy Larson, I believe, asked her to join the team at some point. So just cool stories, and like, just, I don't know, like, main point, especially because it's a difficult market, like you were saying right now. Anything you can do
Hmm.
to stand out, in my mind, is always a good thing. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
if you said like, "Hey, I'm a mass murderer," that's a whole other conversation. Like, oh, that's fantastic. I'm just let me call 911. But you know what I mean? It's like, because I remember like when I worked in a restaurant, you would give, I don't think I'm alone in this, but you would give certain clients like nicknames sometimes, like, oh, that's like orders too much coffee and never tips guy, and like so on and so. And it's the same kind of thing in an interview, like, oh, that's death metal Skulk, like,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
again, to my point, regardless of the outcome, you're gonna be remembered, which is a good thing. So, anyways, just a
Yeah.
little side note.
No, for
Go ahead.
sure. No, 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 for sure. I mean, I think the memorable thing is important because sometimes it is not that there was. I think we spoke with. I spoke with a friend of mine the other day about this, where she didn't get or they didn't get the job they really thought they would have, and they couldn't really
Yeah.
understand why. They felt like they were the perfect fit, and sometimes it's not you or anything. It's just at that point for that role, you weren't the exact
Yeah.
right fit. But
Exactly.
a month from now, something else might come up, and people say, you know that the death metal guy. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He would be great for this role. So that's
Yeah.
how that whole memorable aspect can come back to benefit you.
Yeah. 100%. And I think I was talking to Becca or a bunch of people. It was during a virtual coffee, and like about when people don't get the roles, but like it went well, like you're saying, and it could be that scenario, like you're saying. It's like, we've already got a Skulk on the team. He's amazing, but we already have one, and
Hmm.
that's not a
Hmm.
negative. It's just didn't work out there. And to your point, yeah, like if something else opens up, they'll definitely think of you because they were obviously, appreciative of what how you interviewed and stuff. And there's other things too out of people's control. Like I always used to be like, why don't they just hire any from any time zones and stuff for like remote work?
Mm,
And there's a few things. There's like when I worked at Netlify, for example, they didn't hire in every region, and part of it is one, it's for tax reasons. Like they're not set up to do this.
yep.
Like I'm in Canada, and so like I think the minimum is you're supposed to be 13 people in a country, and then you can create an entity for the company. So that's
Mm,
what happened for me.
hmm.
But my first month before they were doing all that, I was a contractor. Um, and there's services that allow you to do the contracting. But the other thing too is time zones can be difficult. Like I'm in the east coast of North America in Montreal, and most of my team I had two other teammates that were one was in Montreal, the other one was in Toronto, next pretty close, and then the rest were in the UK. And there was like a
Mm,
6 hour or 5 hour difference, but that overlap worked. But if our team on the east coast was working with somebody who had a 20-hour time difference, it's doable, but it's a lot more difficult. And there's things like that can come into play as well, and eh, I don't know. It's tough, but and yeah, there's many reasons. And then there's also just the reasons that it was just not a good fit, and like maybe it's better you didn't end up working there for extra extra number of reasons.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah.
yeah.
Remote's
Um
challenging.
yeah.
Remote's challenging, but I think like the way, like when it works is pretty much when you go into it with a remote first mentality. I mean, we struggle with that. It's so weird when you say that with Mozilla because people generally think like Mozilla is this like globally distributed company, which they are. Um, Maybe to some extent less now a little bit, but they still are pretty distributed, to be honest.
Mhm.
But even there was a time where we had to step back and say, there's some stuff that works and there's some things that really not working. And and the things that weren't working is because when Mozilla started, they had this remote first policy, which means basically everybody acts or not acts, everybody works as if they were remote, even if you're not.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a way of thinking, it's a way of doing things, it's a way of documenting things, it's a way of planning for meetings, all this stuff. And if you
Mhm.
approach it like that, you can get away with being pretty distributed. The
Yeah.
challenge comes in when you have this kind of like remote-ish kind of sort of
Yeah.
and then you start
Totally.
and then the overlap becomes important because otherwise you have the situation where somebody goes to bed at night, they wake up the next morning and decisions were made while you were asleep and you had no say in them, and you might
Yeah,
be
totally.
vehemently opposed against them and you're just like, now I missed the boat because I was sleeping. And for
Yeah,
sometimes it's
totally.
hard too. I mean, we used to have these things called beer and tell. So I think we did it twice a month on a Friday, where essentially it's just a bunch of the front end folks that we get together and just talk about either things you're doing as
Mhm.
part of your work, or maybe you're doing some open source thing and you want to show it off or something, or ask for
Yeah.
feedback, whatever, whatever. And the challenging thing there was to find a time that worked for everybody because
Yeah.
this is real time over video. It's not an async thing. So we had to
Mhm.
make sacrifices. Like one week, I would sacrifice and stay up until 11 at night to join, and then the next
Yeah.
time, other people will stay up or get up really early to to get that mix in. But it's
Yeah.
always tricky. But the whole tax thing, that is a problem. That is a problem. The bigger the
Yeah.
company gets, the harder it becomes.
Yeah. For sure. And no, I love what you said because like when I worked at Dev too, I had coworkers in Thailand and India, so it was almost a 20-hour time difference. And so when we were still a small enough team, like eventually we stopped having an all hands because it was unmanageable with the time zones. But in the early days, we would do like what you're saying. It's like some days the everybody in North America would be up late so that it would be convenient for people in India and Thailand, and then the other time it would be the reverse, and that I think personally, I think that's a totally fair compromise because I love working remotely and I'm very okay with doing that if it's if it's not constant. Um, and the other thing to your point too is, and this is something that I think kind of got a light shined on it during the pandemic. All these companies had to go remote, but they weren't working remote because
Yeah.
like I had friends working at larger companies like SAP or whatever, and he was like in meetings like 7 hours a day, and I'm like, what are you like? I'm
Mm.
like, oh my god, because they were literally operating as if they were just like in the office, and it didn't work. Or well, I can't say for sure because I don't work there, but it to me that would have drove me like I would have I don't know what, but like and the thing about working remote is at least a good remote company, you're intentional about always writing things down. Like, I mean, we work in open
Yeah.
source at Open Sauce, so like most of the stuff is in pull request issues, discussions, but we also like if we have a meeting, the time zone difference isn't that bad. Like the worst time zone difference is like 3 hours, like East Coast and West Coast now. And then I have a coworker in Argentina, but she's like only an hour difference for me. But regardless, people have things going on in their lives. They can't always make things on time or have to skip it. So we always record them. Even if
Hmm.
it seems like a mundane conversation, just record it because even if they're not part of that conversation, they can go back to it, they can listen to it, they can provide feedback. And
Yeah.
these are like, and they're not big lifts to do these things. It's just people. Like I remember when I worked at Autodesk, it would just be like, oh, can we just have a meeting? And like, but like well, there's a whole discussion about like, do we really need this meeting? but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it was just like nothing was, no notes were taken or like nothing was recorded, because like this was pre-pandemic, but like I worked in Montreal, I had coworkers in the UK and stuff, and uh there was we were using Zoom at the time, I think, or maybe something else, but like nothing was recorded. Note we did take notes, I mean, for those present, but I think it was people taking notes on their own. It wasn't so much like
Mm,
here's like
mm.
here's like the notes for the entire meeting, so like there's definitely stuff like that. I'm just gonna pause for a sec because there's a few comments I missed in the chat there.
Sure
There's
thing.
uh Luis Estevez says you seem familiar to him. He's not sure why. And then somebody's also saying they love your CSS background. I can see it behind you. And
Oh.
yeah, and what else? Charles just joined. Hey Charles, how you doing? Charles
Hey,
works
Charles.
in front end as well, and uh, always nice to see him. And yeah, time zones are difficult, but they can be managed. It just takes a lot of work, I think. Like if you really want to
Yeah.
be remote, you just got to put in that work, and it's easier to do it if you do it at the beginning versus trying to change processes like 3
Mm.
years in, so um
Yeah, that's
but yeah.
difficult. That's very difficult. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think at Factorial, I really appreciate how well documented everything is.
Okay.
And it was obviously done, it must have been done very intentionally. It was started by three freelancers, but all
Okay.
of them are in Germany, but might not all have been in Hamburg. I don't know. but it's clearly very very intentional because pretty much anything
Yeah.
that you want to know, you could just open up. So they use Confluence there, so
Okay.
you could just pop up in Confluence, open the search, and search for something, and like everything is in there. Um, which is great. Like I love that. But the other thing
Hmm.
that I wanted to say about the note taking thing, the most impressive demonstration of that I've ever seen was I joined a team meeting from, I can't remember to this day, like I think it was the DevTools team at Mozilla.
Okay.
But so they would take notes during the meeting. They'd have a dedicated person to take notes. And then at the end, a like a subset of them would stay after the meeting. What they would do is take those notes, um,
Okay.
expand on them a little bit, and then turn that into a blog post that they post to their blog,
Oh, okay. That's great.
which is just like, boo, that is so cool because now they're talking to the outside world. You know, people who want to
Hmm.
know what's happening in DevTools. I'm thinking it was DevTools. They can read the meeting minutes, but also for
Yeah.
everybody that was there, you have this thing to go back to. But I think the recording thing is also important from a mental health perspective because I think
Yeah.
some people are nervous in this kind of situation like me and you right now, and they might be
Yeah.
quiet, they might kind of forget what people were saying because they were a bit anxious or something like that. And so for them, it's really cool if they can go back and they can kind of listen through it.
Hmm.
They can pause and then listen through it again. I think that's one of the things that changed education online, right? Is this ability
Yeah.
to be able to pause, go back, pause, go back. You don't have a teacher that's like, oh, I'm not going to explain this again. You can
Yeah. Yeah.
you can literally play that video as many times as you want, and the person will never get angry at you.
Yeah.
Interesting
For
story
sure.
related to that, but with AI. So I have like one podcast that's temporarily on pause. It's called the Mycelium Network podcast, and
Okay.
it's me speaking to junior developers. And I was speaking to somebody from Nigeria, and I was asking like, what do you think about it? And she was actually like, it's actually a really good thing, and she uses it quite a lot. And I was like, what do you use it for? And she said, well, because she's still a junior, and she just
Hmm.
started at this new company, um, she oftentimes have questions, but then she's a bit shy, and the whole like what's it, imposter syndrome thing. And
Yeah.
also where you don't want to ask somebody the question because you're scared they're going to turn around and say, you should know this, how do you get this job, this kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what she does is she goes to ChatGPT and asks the question there first and sees
Okay.
what it gives her, like takes that in, does a little bit more research, and then if she still doesn't understand, she'll go to somebody and ask, but already with
Okay.
some of this information already there, because she feels that the chatbot is not going to judge her for the questions she's asking. So she
Yeah.
feels comfortable asking the quotes stupid questions, right? Because the chatbot is not going to tell you, oh, that's a stupid question. Why do you? It's just going to try and help you,
Yeah.
and it's weird that it's almost like a learning experience for us humans, um,
Hmm.
that sometimes maybe instead of being judgmental about the question being asked, maybe just try and be helpful instead.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
but I understand it's always this tricky thing of if you're, again, it's a cultural thing. It's how is the company set up? Because
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of companies taking on juniors, and it's a terrible experience for them. And I've seen other companies taking in juniors and they absolutely love it. And the difference is the support system within the company and how the company's culture is set up. If the culture is set up that you have somebody that's your mentor and helps you understand things and answers your questions and that kind of stuff, it's a much healthier environment, and
Oh yeah. Definitely.
it's just better, and it works so much better. So but the company needs to be set up for that, to do that.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel that. Like, I started like m- uh, my professional career in 2002, and I always felt stupid starting off and like not asking because I didn't want to appear dumb and stuff. And it was definitely a cultural thing there. And to be honest, sometimes I just nodded and I still didn't know just to kind of get through it, which is a terrible thing to do. Um, but nowadays I don't always do this. I try to do this, but like whenever like a term comes up, or if like say we're in a conversation like now, and somebody says RSCs, and then I won't say, for those who don't know what that is, I'll just say, oh, RSCs, React Server Components. And like it's not looking down to somebody, or just stating it, or type it in the chat. And that way it just kind of like, as somebody more senior, one, it shows like, okay, or if I don't even know what it is, I'll say like, what is that? I don't know, and like that
Yep.
shows that, okay, Nick's okay to say like, I don't know what that is. That means it's okay for me. And
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
subtle thing, but and I don't do it all the time. I try to, but sometimes I slip. But um, and yeah, it's just I think AI is leveling that field a bit. And like, the other thing too, I would say to a lot of people now is like, because you know obviously people have different experience, but when you have a problem, you shouldn't just say like, this doesn't work, can you help me, like I'm not expecting somebody junior to give me like this full report of why it's not working, but like, maybe something like, okay, the page crashed and it gave this error and I don't know what to do now, you know and then maybe
Hmm.
somebody more senior might mention that, but also say, I checked the logs and something else. But like, just do that mini bit of due diligence. And I'm not saying that to be gatekeepy. It's more to be respectful of people's time, I think. It's
Hmm.
because like, just putting in just a little bit of time to say, okay, I tried something, and now I'm stuck. Cuz like, I've seen it happen a lot of times where people just immediately throw out like, I need help, I need help, and it's overwhelming, to be honest. I love helping people.
Hmm.
But it's something, like in our virtual coffee community, when people do that, we don't look down on it. We just say like, oh, okay, well, what did you try? And like,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
to get something kind of going, and oh, we got somebody else that joined the chat. Hey, Hijabi Coder, hope you're doing well. I was gonna say, SD, who's in the chat too, was saying she gets nervous too, like in conversations and stuff. And so, like, get to your point about like, the recordings or just writing notes after. And it's, uh, you know, we forget about that sometimes, because like, what is normal these days? Like, everybody's so different. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
extroverted, so like, I have no problem just going talking to a random person, but I know not everybody can do that. And like,
Yeah.
sometimes I forget that. So I kind of have
Hmm.
to do a little check. But it's technology's definitely just helped in so many ways, especially, you were talking about accessibility before, but like, there's a lot of backlash, like after the pandemic, with all these return to office, which, you
Hmm.
know, it was proven you could work at home, right? Like, so why do you have to be back in the office now? And you know, I don't know the whole stories of every company, but I would say a lot of it has to do with, well, we've spent millions of dollars on a lease for a building, and I feel like that's what it is.
That is a big one. That is a big one.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're stuck with the lease. That's the problem. You can't get rid of the damn lease. Because I
yeah.
know Mozilla has closed some of their offices because
Hmm.
they just don't need it. But I know, I know, like with even with software, like the big companies, they tend to have year-long or longer contracts, and so oftentimes it's like I'm paying for a building that I'm not using.
Yeah,
Um, But yeah, yeah. I mean, because there's an accessibility aspect, like you were, I think, hinting at, to the whole remote thing. It allows more people to do the
hmm,
same job. Because for a lot of
yeah,
people, getting to an office is the challenge, right? Just physically,
totally.
sometimes, not even necessarily where they live, that they're very remote or urban, not urban, the opposite. It's
Yeah,
just literally for them, they're kind of homebound, and getting to an office is challenging. And oftentimes the buildings aren't set up. So even if you can get to the building, getting into the
yeah,
building, getting around the building is in itself a challenge. So, I think
totally.
things like that opens it up to more people.
Yeah, no, totally. And I guess, speaking of accessibility, this is something you said you were pretty passionate about, and like, obviously this is it's not just front end. I think it's something every technologist should be aware of. But I know a lot of I find like I'm doing mainly front end at the moment, so it's like even though I'm not an accessibility expert, it's always top of mind. I'm doing my best to make something accessible, and I've been lucky enough to work with some people who are accessibility experts. Like when I worked at Dev 2, Marcy Sutton, who's an accessibility
Wow.
professional,
Yeah, yeah.
she came to work with us on a contract for, can't remember if it was a month and a half or 2 months, and just that like leveled me up. And again, I'm not a accessibility professional, but that was a big lift. And then I had an amazing coworker who ended up going to work with me at Netlify, Suzanne Aitchison, and she's a web accessibility expert. And there was just stuff I learned from her as well. And because there's so much like I know you know this, but like you get a lot of stuff for free if you just use semantic HTML and do like what the browser expects,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Hmm.
there's been like it's I think I feel like there's two things. I'm curious like on your thoughts. Like I I can't really get mad at somebody who's starting off in the field because they might just not be aware of it, and they're just I think a lot of people from boot camps, at least in the past 4 years, the push has been really you're gonna learn React, and then because that's what the job market wants, and learning React is
Hmm.
not. I'm not against learning a framework or library before fundamentals. I think you should just build something, but regardless, there's like a gap of things where like oh, I can just click a button and do something, but what about the form and all that? And I'm curious about your thoughts, especially because you worked at Mozilla as well, which was
Hmm.
MDN and all that. It's kind of like bread and butter stuff. They have like amazing documentation on all these things. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think for one thing, and this is something that I've spoken to with a lot of folks in the accessibility field, it's not part of education, and therefore it's
yeah,
always going to be an afterthought. We need to make it part of curriculums, but I think I'm also not opposed to framework. So the interesting thing at Factorial is that we're trying to not avoid frameworks, but it's not the first thing we grab, right? So we don't like,
yeah,
here's a project, cool, React, here we go. We evaluate whether it makes sense. Is there reactive aspects to this? Yes, cool, okay, now we need to think. And then we think of something that's as close to the web platform as possible.
yeah,
Um, and I think a lot of the frameworks are going that way anyway now, um,
yeah,
but I think the bigger problem is just that it's not part of education, and therefore
hmm,
it's not taught to people. So they kind of have to figure this out either by having the opportunity to work with somebody that is passionate about it, and them saying like, "Oh, did you know by doing this you're actually excluding this whole group of people, or you're making it really hard for them to do this, that, or the other thing." Um,
hmm,
but what I'm really liking is I'm seeing more and more people talking about HTML, because for the
yeah,
longest time people weren't really talking about HTML. Um, and I'm just loving that I'm seeing that, because that's where it starts. Like it, when I spoke to Hida de Vries the other day, I told him
hmm,
like, the big thing is the web is inherently accessible. It is what
yeah,
we add that makes it inaccessible. So if you just code something up in semantic HTML, it's 100% accessible, and like he said, very fast. Um,
yeah,
it's all the stuff we add on top of that that makes it inaccessible and makes it slow. So so it's great that more and more people are talking about that, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's if
hmm,
you really understand, and it can save you a bunch of time. Like
yeah,
I
totally,
remember I was just on it's this indie kind of like creator forum thingy where people just during their day say, "Oh, I'm doing this thing," or "I've done that," da, da, da. And somebody was saying like, "Oh, I'm trying out all these different date pickers. I don't know which to choose." And I said, "Have you tried input type date?" And I was like,
yeah,
"Oh, I forgot." And it's like no extra JavaScript needed. It's a single line of HTML, and you get a
yeah,
date picker. that works across browsers, works across operating systems,
Yeah.
um, and it's accessible. So oftentimes we can spend quite a bit of time and effort taking a bunch of responsibility on ourselves to re-implement something that the browser is already giving you for free. Um,
Yeah.
but we do need to be careful because not everything, just because the browser gives it to you, is accessible. Like I know there's
Mm-hmm.
some challenges with the native error handling, like when you mark a field as required, or I think
Yeah.
there's some challenges there. The dialogue element for the longest time wasn't quite where it should be. Now it's all good. Um, but yeah, it's worth knowing the caveats. Like
Yeah.
not everything just
Totally.
because the browser gives it to you is accessible entirely. There's oftentimes like the good old days. There's inconsistencies
Mm-hmm.
between browsers, and so
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
is more accessible in one than the other, and you know,
Yeah. I definitely do not miss document.all.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Charles in the chat saying, keeping up with all things that happen once we've learned HTML or CSS is mind blowing. When I went to FEDC, I'm not sure what that is, front end something, maybe front end DC in the States. I learned so much about new CSS techniques from Stephanie Eccles. It's wild. Yeah, Stephanie Eccles is amazing. I had her on the Dev2 live stream a couple times. She's a great resource, and she created a really cool site called stylestage.dev, which is kind of like a homage to CSS Zen Garden. So
Oh
same
yeah.
kind of, so you style it kind of in the same vein, but it's always the same markup, which is pretty
Hmm.
cool. And oh, Charles is saying it's front end design conference in St. Pete's, Florida. Okay, cool.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, but yeah, there's definitely more talk and chatter about HTML, and I think CSS as well, because there's a lot of stuff where like you used to have to do these, like even like we haven't had to worry about this in a long time, but like rounded corners, like we have this radius now, but like we used to literally
Hmm.
have to use images or like space, like a little 1 pixel spacer GIF, like all kinds of things. We've got gap now and stuff. I think I just feel like there's been like kind of like the JavaScript language became super accelerated in terms of adding features. It's like something kickstarted with CSS and HTML, and like there's a lot of things coming out now. Like we have the native dialogue element now. There's the pop-up API, like, and these are things that like you've always had to reach for like a library or like write some
Yeah.
custom JavaScript. And so like one, it's reducing the amount of code you're shipping, which is a good thing, and you're still getting
Hmm.
native functionality. And there's just all kinds of neat stuff like it'll put an overlay background, but it'll also bring it to the front. You don't have to worry about like z indexes and stuff, and like
Hmm.
and that's all for free, which is super super cool. And like even like CSS with like there's a lot of advanced animation stuff now, and then like container queries and like just more advanced selectors. Like I don't know, I could go on and on here, but like there's just like these things, like, and it doesn't mean don't use React like or like some framework. It's
No.
just like still leverage those frameworks, because that when you work on a remotely complex system, I do think you need a framework at some point. It's just like
Hmm.
you don't have to do all that extra baggage now. Lean for the native stuff, and it's kind of cool too if like if you have a design system and you had some super complex pop-up API or like modal, you can just literally replace it with the native stuff and everybody benefits instantly, which is cool
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, the one thing that I'm doing now at Factorial is we're looking at creating a component library that is, so the ideal is that it's technology agnostic. And so we
okay.
were looking at web components because so we do a lot of Drupal stuff at Factorial, and it's basically because that is where Factorial started. Like
Yeah.
three freelancers that decided to pool their efforts and start a company, and they're super well known for Drupal. Like there's
Hmm.
core maintainers of Drupal on there and all this kind of stuff. So, but Factorial is doing more and more broader projects now that involves a lot of
Yeah.
front end work, UX, UI, and so we're trying to position the front end team in a specific way, and we're trying to position it as very much focused on open web and web
Okay.
accessibility. And so, over like a React shop or a Vue shop or one of these things. And so
Mm-hmm.
we were thinking, like, what can we do? So we were thinking web components. That's
Okay.
like the obvious one, right? But the challenge with web components is, okay, but what if you want to do server side rendering? What is the story there? And then yesterday, I stumbled on this podcast episode from Changelog, JS Body.
Yeah.
And there's this project called Enhance,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah.
first of all looks freaking amazing. It's like an HTML framework. And then they have this new thing called Enhance WASM.
Okay.
And what that allows you to do is in pretty much any backend language like Ruby, PHP, Java, .NET, you can server-side render your web components. So now we're experimenting with that. I'm actually putting together a demo for this Thursday to build a form or something that loads some
Okay.
dynamic data for the select fields, but then also a couple of web components, and then do that in PHP and server-side render it.
Okay.
And that is super exciting for me. I was like, whoa, we can actually have things that, because now all the frameworks are like custom elements everywhere. You can use it everywhere. React 19 has now embraced it, first class citizen. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a web component library, you can pull that into anything. You can pull it into your PHP, you can pull it into Svelte, into Vue, React, whatever you love, Astro, all these things, you can use web components. So I think that is going to be exciting. I think the light DOM thing also made it
Yeah.
more approachable for a lot of people. They don't have to struggle with Shadow DOM.
Yeah.
My biggest
No, totally.
challenge now is understanding um, when do you do Shadow DOM versus light DOM? And if you do light DOM, what's the main benefit to it being a web component over it just being just HTML? Um,
Yeah.
So I don't know what you've read about that, but the one thing I've read is a post from Chris Coyer, where he
Mm-hmm.
talked about, so the idea is, for example, you wrap a details summary, you
Yep.
make it a web component, and then you use JavaScript to enhance the default details summary. But if for some
Yeah.
reason your JavaScript doesn't work, you still just get a detailed summary, which is
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
useful, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I actually hung out with the DevRel over that works for Enhance, Simon McDonald. He
oh,
he lives in
nice.
Ottawa, which is about 2 hours away from me. I actually saw him recently at the Astro meetup in Montreal. I dropped a
Aha.
link. I dropped a link to the YouTube video where we talked about Enhance. This was prior to them having the WASM capabilities. This was just server-side rendered web components. And my old coworker, Zach Leatherman, who works on 11D, he
Hmm.
actually has a similar thing where uh, it's called WebC, and it's server-side
Yeah.
rendered web components as well. Similar in the same idea. I don't think there's a WASM story there, but it is interesting to see, like, yeah, where things go. The and like it makes I was talking to Simon because like there's no there's no actual server side rendering story for web components because it's natively a client side
No.
thing. So it's not, I don't want to say it's a hack, but it's kind of a hack that you're just rendering it and then you're doing what you need to, like filling it up with whatever you need to, but it works, and
Hmm.
it's, I think of it like a templating system basically, and you're filling it up with what you need to begin with, and then you know as opposed to, because like prior to the server side rendering, if you had a web component that needed to have markup in it that like or like pulled from a database or something, you could do it on the client side, but you could never hydrate it, air quotes, to on the server side. So this is enabling
Hmm.
that kinds of stuff. And
Yep.
I am curious about the WASM story, the WebAssembly story though.
Hmm.
It's, yeah, it's
You don't have to use the WASM.
Okay.
You can just do it with plain PHP or something. I'm guessing that makes it faster. It might speed up your render time. I literally
Okay.
learned about it yesterday, so I still need to dig in. But the documentation shows like there's two ways you can do it. The one is with WASM, but then it has some specific hosting requirements. So if you don't want
Okay.
to deal with that integration aspect, you can just do plain PHP.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I
and
see.
I'm guessing it's going to be the same for all the other backend languages.
Okay.
So I would like to understand what the benefit is with WASM. Maybe I'm guessing it's a
Yeah.
speed thing. It's like a render
Yeah,
time.
I would guess too. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
really know what else it could do. If maybe I don't know. Anyway, I'll read up about it and I'll blog about
Yeah.
it once I know more.
Yeah, no, I'm curious to see how that plays out. But yeah, there's just like so many things. Oh, and I do have a question about accessibility here. It just popped in my head, but like I'm a fan of JavaScript. I like the language, and like I've been, I remember starting off my web dev journey in notepad.exe, just typing out HTML with capitalized HTML tags. Um, but is there still a story for not having JavaScript enabled? And I mean this in a sincere way, like not, because like there's a lot of things out there that like you can still create accessible experiences, but there's JavaScript, and in some cases you do need the JavaScript to make it accessible. I would say more, not so much for the native platform HTML tags, but like say you create a super complex like a combo picker or like a autocomplete where you're picking people's names. You do need that extra interactivity to help set area roles and stuff as well. I guess
Hmm.
yeah. Just curious your thoughts on like the like obviously shipping no JavaScript means less code coming down the wire, but just curious on your thoughts about all that because like it comes up all the time still, I think, and I'm just curious on your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tricky nowadays. Like there was this JS Naked Day, I think it was a month or so ago. I can't remember now exactly, where it was the idea is to turn off JavaScript and see how the web behaves. I tested a couple of sites. And I mean, I think for me, one of the things that really surprised me, I mean, the classic CNN.com, I couldn't not test it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
the thing that blew me away there was that their search doesn't work at all if you turn JavaScript off,
Oh, you
which to
can't
me
even
is
do
just
a form okay. Oh,
no.
interesting.
You type in and you hit enter, it kind of loads some other page or it tries to load some other piece of thing, but the search results never comes back. So
Okay.
their search is just broken. The other thing is their menu doesn't open, their main menu. So little
Okay.
hamburger, top left, click, nothing happens. Um, but then the thing there was even when JavaScript's on, if you open the menu and you press escape, it doesn't close the
Mm-hmm.
menu. You have to literally click the burger again. So I think for me, the thing is we're in a highly interactive web at the moment. I
Yeah.
think it's almost it's hard to ship something that doesn't need a little bit of JavaScript. But I think the way to
Yeah.
do it is to do the old school progressive enhancement. Like I think
Mm-hmm.
what we said back in the day when we rewrote MDN to be React front end
Yeah.
is people come to MDN to read the content. So
Yeah.
that should be there, always accessible, readable, easily digestible. And then from there, we can add bells and whistles.
Mm-hmm.
But not, the content shouldn't be unavailable just because some JavaScript error happened. So we have
Yeah.
to be very careful about how we do error boundaries and all those kinds of things. In the end, we probably didn't make the right choice to
Okay.
choose React. Um, there was reasons we did it. Like one of the biggest reasons was there was some product ideas right at that
Mm-hmm.
point when we made the switch that suggested to us that we will need some kind of reactive framework, and we
Okay.
chose React because of the talent pool. The common
Yeah.
reason why a lot of people choose React, it's like if we need to employ somebody to help us or a contractor, we're going to have a big pool of people. If we do web components at that stage, first of all, the support wasn't great. And
Yeah.
secondly, we're going to find it hard to find people who are knowledgeable in web components to join the team. Um,
Yeah.
so that was the main reason. I think today, if we did it again, we would probably use Astro.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
I think Astro would be a super good fit for web docs, just because, yeah, it's built for that, for big content
Yeah.
heavy sites. And it's not, you can do a lot with just plain old JavaScript where you need a little bit. It's not like the whole thing hinges
Yeah.
on JavaScript. So I think it's just making the right choices, is the
Mm-hmm.
big thing. Like I said, like at Factorial, where we don't just grab the first framework that comes to mind and start building a thing. A classic
Yeah.
example of this is, there's a project that we're going to work on for a client, and the idea was, hey, let's use Svelte here because there's going to be some reactive stuff and that. And then we went through the screens with one of the project
Okay.
managers, and we were like, now that we know what the data is and how the data is fetched and how all of that happens, we don't need a reactive framework at all because there's nothing real time being updated. Like
Okay.
the state of the world only settles after a period of time. It's not like I click now to disable this user and they're disabled.
Okay.
It's this triggers a ticket that then needs to be resolved separately from this. And at some point, the user will be disabled. But now when
Okay.
I've
Yeah.
loaded the page, the state of the application is that's the state. It's not going to
Yeah.
change much. There's some interactivity like you're opening a dialogue or something, but you don't need a framework for that. You can just use popover, you can use some
Yeah.
pretty simple JavaScript to do that. Um, so I think it's just making informed decisions and taking a little bit of time before you just say no. This is clearly a React project or a Vue project or whatever your
Yeah.
preference is. Um, I think that is where accessibility. That's where accessible problems comes in, and I think like the classic example also is the search as you type of
Yeah.
thing. Like that's one of those things we have to be careful. It can be tricky to make that accessible. You have to start working with ARIA live regions so
Yeah.
that but then you have to be careful what is the live region. Like we had a whole discussion about this the other day, because the most important thing I think for a user that is using a screen reader is to know that when they're typing, are there any results? So
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to tell them about everything, as long as you keep them informed that 10 results, 15 results, 0
Mm-hmm.
results. That gives them a sense of where they are, and then make it obvious that when you tab, that you're going to tab into the container that's a list, so that the thing can
Mm-hmm.
tell you list of 10 items, and then you can tab
Yeah.
into each one. Um, it's just it's the classic, like software is 80% thinking, 20% code. Um,
Yeah.
whereas oftentimes we think it's the other way around. Just planning
No,
and thinking
totally.
through the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm glad you mentioned that with the list because like getting back to like how great CSS is nowadays, like things that need to be lists, you can literally style them however you want, but the semantic markup is still a list, which is, so like in terms of like search results, for example, like a classic example might just be returning the text, but like for example, like we search for users, we don't do this right now, but like we could add their avatar into the list, but you have it either as area hidden because it's just ornamental, but you're
Hmm.
still getting an actual list and it just looks nicer, and like I think that's where like and don't get me wrong, I've had a case of divitis at some point too, but I
Yeah.
could see why people would lean towards a div without, because it's like it's not styled, it's like clean slate, and I think that's maybe where some of that comes from too, because it's like, oh well, I've got a list but it's got like a dot at the beginning, and it's like there's padding and there's like a margin, and like and like nowadays like all of that is just like it's pretty much not wild wild west, but like there's so much you can do with CSS that like you can just make it look super good, And to your point too, like about the CNN website menu, like that can all be done with CSS now.
Yeah.
It could be that it's just legacy code base and they just never updated the hamburger menu,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think one of the hardest things I've found with accessibility work is like focus states, because when you get into a more complex
Mm.
thing, it's one thing when you're tabbing through a form, like it says, okay, focus. This is assuming you have a label with the form element and stuff. It can tell the person, but
Yep.
I know I didn't do so much of this work as my old coworker Suzanne did, but if you ever write a blog post on Dev2, she made the autocomplete when you're in a blog post, like if you ever want to at somebody, and
Hmm. Hmm.
it's super complex because you have initially focus in a text area where you're typing, and then you do at, and then this pop-up comes up, and I can't remember if it was that gets focused temporarily, but as soon as you're done, the focus comes back to the text area at the exact cursor point you were. And like,
Yeah.
to be able to tell somebody that is like, that's where like a getting back to what I was saying about using not so much a native element but like something more complex like that. That's where
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
the area, attributes come into play, some JavaScript. But it was, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I find that hard. But the thing with accessibility that I've seen is there's a lot of low hanging fruit, and like this is what a lot of accessibility experts have told me, like that I've interviewed. It's like alt text is like a just like super low hanging fruit if it needs it.
Hmm.
Like the form adding labels to input, like those are all like kind of like table stakes kind of stuff that you should just be doing. But again, when you're starting off, you just might not know that, and it kind of gets back to what you were saying about they don't teach these things,
Yep.
and it takes time. I kind of equate it to like, I was in university a long time ago, but like they never taught us testing. And but
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
testing is a super important thing, and like even boot camps don't really do this. And I understand why to some degree. It's a condensed timeline, but like it's like a super valuable thing to learn, and it does take time to get better at, obviously. But yeah, I think I feel like it's just this whole promise of getting a job in such a condensed timeline that is kind of
Hmm.
also exacerbated this issue a bit. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think testing in general is much neglected at most companies
Yeah.
because and again it's because it's not baked into the planning, right? So when you
Yeah.
estimate something, you're estimating like how long will it take me to build this component. You're not
Hmm.
thinking and test it.
Yeah.
um,
Totally.
and I think on the web it's especially important because one of the things that still find these days, and this is not a burn on designers or anything, but a lot of designers coming from a print background don't understand the web, and they
Hmm.
still try to to force things to just look this way always, and it's next to impossible on the web. And I think
Yeah.
interesting design opportunities open themselves up when you embrace what the web is, and that it's
Hmm.
this canvas that can be cropped and shaped any which way. And it's like,
Yeah.
what do you do when you have this freedom, the users having all this freedom? And then you have the accessibility aspects where people can zoom in, they can change the font, they can change the colors, like on Windows, they can force contrast, high contrast mode, all these kinds of things. There's a lot you don't have control over. And if
Hmm.
you kind of play to that, it opens up possibilities for you, as opposed to trying to force the medium to do what you want it to do, because then you're
Yeah.
constantly fighting, trying to get it. Oh, but the image is just not right. Now you're starting to use calc
Yeah.
to try and calculate where the image should be. But then if you, again, not that a lot of like end users do this, but if you take the browser window and you like you narrow it down, you get
Yeah.
this flicker happening because calc is calculating the position. The
Yeah.
browser
Yeah.
needs to repaint constantly. Now you're opening another problem because those things can trigger seizures in some people. If it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
flickers at the right rate, you can trigger a seizure in somebody. So it is super, super tricky. But again, if you embrace the platform and you play to its strengths, then you can do some cool stuff. And I mean, CSS, like you were talking earlier, CSS is blowing up right now. There
Yeah.
is so much going on. It's like I can't keep up. I heard the other day from Miriam Suzanne, like she's low key working on bringing mixins and functions to CSS.
Oh, no way,
Like,
from SAS. Oh, that's cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I
Okay.
mean, it is, CSS is just turning into this super, super, super incredible language that you can just do so much with. But again, you have to play to the strength. People don't want like the cascade, but it's
Yeah.
there's a reason for the cascade. The cascade is basically because of this thing where you can override something from the
Mm-hmm.
browser level. But when you were talking about alt text, I don't know if you saw Firefox is going to do an experiment
Yeah.
with a local LLM running
Oh,
inside the
no way.
browser that'll infer alt text for images and update the HTML. But it's local, so technically it should be privacy respecting. It's not
Okay, yeah, yeah.
sending everything to the cloud. So that sounds pretty interesting, and it makes sense that's the browsers should solve that, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to, of course, we as web authors should be responsible and put alt tags where alt tags are needed and empty alt tags when it's decorative, so the screen reader
Mm-hmm.
will ignore the image.
Yeah.
But there's still a big web with a lot of missing alt text that people aren't going to go back and update.
Oh, yeah,
So
for sure.
if a browser can retroactively fix this for a lot of people, I mean, it just improves the experience for a lot of folks. Because there's
Yeah.
still tools these days that don't allow you to add alt text to an image. Like I know I've been mining at buffer.com for the longest time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't use you because I can't add alt text to the images. So I have to go to the social media site because thankfully most of them these days allow you to do that. So but a tool like Buffer
Yeah.
doesn't allow you, so I can't use it because otherwise I'm gonna, if my message that I'm sharing is the image is a core part of it, then I can't do it through that because now I can't put alt text there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excluding a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
SD in the chat saying definitely not enough emphasis on those things, referring to accessibility and testing.
Yeah.
Um, she had a coworker obsessed with the calc function. Um, um, yeah, she's curious about the whole mix-ins coming natively. That'd be nice. I mean, we already got nested selectors, which is already nice. Um,
Mhm.
and and she's also saying, to be honest, I often forget the alt text. And the, I don't know. It's weird. Like I can understand to some degree. This is not a knock on UST. This is not what I mean. Like I always put alt text like when I publish something on social media because I know as a web dev I should do that, and also I know it does literally help people. But I can understand like why like in response to like your local LLM and Firefox, like if my mother were to post pictures, she's older. She's just not going to know about alt text. She's not going to post it even if she did know. And it's not because
Mhm.
she's a bad person, it's just like think about like even image sites. Like I'll be honest, I've even got exhausted doing it. Like when I post stuff to Instagram, if I have like
Mhm.
10 photos or something,
Yeah.
sometimes I will go and add the alt text, but sometimes I'm like, this is exhausting. Like you know what I mean? And that's where a tool to kind of like what you're referring to would come into play
Yeah.
because it makes a better experience for people. The consumer doesn't have to worry about it because like if we're being honest, people that aren't web developers unless you work in like social media or marketing, maybe you're probably not aware of this. I would
Mhm. Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I could be I could be
Mhm.
wrong about that, but so like I could totally see LLMs doing that kinds of stuff, assuming the premise, like you said, where it really is private. It's literally only running locally and not leaking stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's a great use case, I think. And if it I guess it wouldn't really be feasible, but it'd be cool if like there was like a bot that crawls and just sends PRs to open source websites to say, hey,
Yeah.
I generated alt text for your things, but I don't know how feasible that would be, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think tools can play a role here. Like, for example, I think Dev2 does a good job. Like, if you upload an image into a post and you
Yeah.
don't add alt text, it adds a little red error message there saying like, oh, there's an image missing alt text. Now,
Yeah.
of course, the audience they're speaking to is people who will know, ah, dang, forgot it, and quickly you know exactly what it's referring to. So for other things like social media websites, obviously, not only do you need to highlight that you should probably add alt text,
Yeah.
but what is that? Why do I even want to add that? But then the other challenge there with alt text is that I found I made like a little custom GPT where you can just drag and drop an image and it'll give you alt text.
Okay.
Because I think, but the thing is, like, one, you should not really have to go to a third party to do that. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
the social media site should say, I generated possible alt text for you. Is this okay? Or do you want to edit a little bit? Shouldn't really have to
Mm-hmm.
go to the one. Because I think for some people where English is not their first language, it's challenging to write alt text, right?
Oh yeah,
So
that
it'd
too.
be
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if something can generate something for you and you'd be like, yeah, that sounds good. And you can use it or you can edit a little bit, but at least you have a
Mm-hmm.
starting point. I think that's one of the biggest things for me with these generative AI stuff is it solves the blank page problem
Yeah.
where you're like staring at a page and like, I don't know what I know what I want to write, but I just can't start writing. Where it can give you something that you can start with, but you shouldn't just copy paste and then there we go, blog
Yeah.
post. Um,
No,
but
totally.
yeah, so I think there's integration and tools needed, and along with that, an educational aspect to highlight it's missing and this is why it's important. Because I'm sure,
Yeah.
like with your mother, if Facebook, for example, would tell you, oh, there's missing alternative text and it's important because people who are low vision or
Mm-hmm.
blind will not be able to know what the picture is about. Here's a little piece of text that you could include if you're happy with that. She'll probably be like, oh yeah, cool, definitely want to do that. Add
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
post, that kind of thing. So I think it's this like our tools also need to catch up and help us a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
but of
Totally.
course, and we as developers need to take that responsibility on. And it's all about thinking. I said the other day, like when you're developing something, um, it's just taking those moments to say, if I'm going to do this thing this way, who might I be excluding from using
Mm-hmm.
this thing? And then that makes you just take a pause for a moment and say like, "Ah, shit, yeah, okay, wait. Is there a different way I can do this
Yeah.
that doesn't
No,
exclude
totally.
people?" Yeah, but
Yeah.
timelines, deadlines
Yeah. No,
sometimes don't allow
totally.
you.
Yeah, and to your point too, like it could be tooling that just doesn't allow you to, like maybe I don't know, but like, like a dam, like where you have all your images, maybe I'm assuming most modern ones probably allow you to put alt text, but like I don't think we had alt text when we had one where I used to work years ago, and so like right away it's like even if you wanted to, you can't, right? So
Mhm.
but
Yeah, Mattermost, for example, doesn't allow you to add alt text to images. So Mattermost is like an open source Slack.
okay.
And unlike Slack or so Slack does a really good job of it. Like when you add it, it puts a little alt thing. When you hover over it and where you focus it, it like shows you stuff. Discord is weird. I don't know what happens to the alt text you add. It's somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, and then but Mattermost doesn't allow you to add it. So what I do there is I type my message, upload the image, and then I below that I put a little line that says alternative text, and then I put it
Okay.
there. I've seen some people do that on Discord as well because it's like unclear how you get access to the alt text. But I
Yeah.
know Discord's been doing quite a bit to make Discord more accessible, which is great to see. And GitHub,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, they're doing a lot.
Oh yeah,
They're doing a lot.
GitHub's very accessible.
And it's Microsoft pushing that. I have a friend that works at GitHub, and so like you have security checklists before you can push something, they now have accessibility checklists that
Okay.
all needs to be matched. But that's a double-edged sword checklists because just because you've
Mm-hmm.
checked the checkboxes doesn't mean it's necessarily accessible. Um,
Yeah, true.
I think the classic thing is like, how do we make our dialogue more accessible? Don't use a
Yeah.
dialogue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Problem
Totally.
solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what was SC saying? Alt text gen is my favorite use of AI for a writing workflow, to be honest. And to your point about the warnings on Dev 2, that my old coworker Suzanne is the one that implemented that.
Nice,
So
nice.
yeah. And the thing, another thing about that is this is a good example of this, I think, is it warns you, but it doesn't prevent you from posting your blog post, because like you could go like the the really like hard ass way and say like you can't post this until you add this text, which it's obviously a good thing to add the alt text, but I think it's a good compromise where you're not angering the user, you know? You're just
Hmm.
giving them information, or like just FYI in case you didn't know. And I think that's a better approach, because like I know it can be thankless, just from the people I've spoken to, and the few accessibility experts that I know, like it's a tiring job, it's draining, because like you're always beating the drum to say this is important, and I get it. And honestly, this is partially why I don't think I would ever want to become an accessibility specialist. I I definitely want to be aware of, and when I build things, I do want to make them as accessible as possible, but it I don't think I would want to take that burden. That sounds terrible, but it's super draining, and like, and getting mad about it, I don't think helps. Like, obviously educating people, but like if you're just like your site sucks because you used an overlay, or like, you're not doing these things, it doesn't motivate people to fix things, I don't think, so it's like,
Hmm.
I don't know,
Hmm.
it's tough though, because like if you constantly telling people to, then there's the other side of the coin, which is like, come on, man, like I keep telling, so I don't know what the answer is. It's just more like just anecdotal stuff, but
No, no, no. I think like being a little bit in people's faces and at least telling them that, hey, this is, you should be doing this, but not preventing, because what will people do? They'll end up just putting gibberish in there just so that the tool can
yeah,
shut up so they can post their blog, which is worse, you know.
yeah,
Um, and then about the whole doing accessibility audits. I mean, Todd Libby, I mean,
yeah,
he almost quit tech because of that, because he was just getting
yeah,
sick of going back every year, running the same aria or the same like set of tests and getting exact same results back. Then
yeah,
he was just like, I'm done. I quit. I'm out.
yeah.
It looks like he didn't end up quitting, because I saw he got a job the other day. But
Oh, he
um,
did, because I know he retired kind of, and then he said, "I'm gonna give a couple talks, and then I'm done." But oh, that's great to hear. I
it
haven't.
looks, yeah,
Okay,
looks like he's
yeah,
got a job again, doing
okay, that's
doing some
cool.
web development stuff. I don't know if he,
Yeah,
maybe he shrugged off the whole I'm an accessibility auditor thing, and he's just like writing code a bit. I don't know.
yeah, because
Um, but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, geez, it's tough. It's tough.
yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I've had Todd on a few times, at Dev Two stream, but also my own stream, and yeah, it's tough and draining, like I was saying, and let's see. Violated sign in the chat is saying, I think most accessibility issues are simply knowledge based. I doubt any developer would willingly exclude a group or make it more difficult for them to use a site. Yeah, I think this gets back to
Yep.
what we were kind of saying, like, hey, you're a new dev starting out. You didn't know that you had to add labels to form elements, like it's not,
Yep.
but then once you educate people, and the thing that I've noticed for me personally is like, I know when something's not accessible now, and I have to fix it. Like, it's not a bad thing,
Yep.
but it's like for like even open source where I work, I did a lot of work to make things more accessible. There's still work to do, don't get me wrong, but like there
Yeah.
was a ton of color contrast issues, and like we're like super busy now. And so I knew last fall, or like close to the Christmas holiday, I was like, I put all this time in to fix a bunch of accessibility issues, because I knew in January we were gonna start going really hard on like feature development. So I was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting this stuff out of the way now, but like there's still stuff that needs fixing, and like but like for the most part, like I'd say like we have focus states, focus rings and stuff like now,
Mm-hmm.
everywhere, I think, pretty sure. Things that shouldn't be buttons or links, like these are like the low hanging fruit ones, but there's some other stuff like I did there's a because we're using React, we're using Next.js. There's a
Mm-hmm.
there's an accessibility ESLint plugin called JSX A11Y,
Ali,
and I
yeah.
yeah, I say Ali too, but it's I always anyways yeah, Ali. But I enabled it, and there's still a ton of errors because there's a bunch of stuff in the site where it's divs with on click, so they don't have proper
Mm,
focus states, or they might have like a tab index, like basically they're recreating a focusable element.
yeah, yeah.
So like I have an issue for it. I should do it on a live stream where I just explain the exact instructions that somebody should do to fix it, because like I can't fix them all
Mm,
myself
mm,
right now, and they'd be great
yeah, yeah.
opportunities for like a open source contribution.
Hmm.
But it's but like anything, it's ongoing work, right? Like uh
Yes, yes.
yeah, yeah,
Like
so just
performance.
yeah,
um
totally.
which needs to come back. We don't talk enough about performance these days. I don't know, like there was a time when like
Yeah, yeah,
you couldn't open an RSS feed without Tim Cadillac screaming about performance, and now it's so quiet. And
yeah.
it's not like the web super fast. I mean, I've experienced the web on a decent 3G connection, and wow, it's hard to use the web when you don't have a fast internet connection.
Oh yeah,
Things
yeah,
are
yeah.
slow. Some things are just
No, totally.
impossible to use. They just don't load ever. They just show you a
Yeah,
little spinner, and that's pretty much it for you. Um, but what I wanted to say is, I think that's one of the superpowers of open source design systems, is this ability to um, get contributions from the wider developer ecosystem, and
yeah,
through that having a lot more robust and a lot more accessible components that you can then use in your system. I think that is, a lot of people are
yeah.
missing out on that by, I mean, it's not always by choice that it's low source, but I think
Hmm.
that is definitely one of the powers of it, because not everybody's an accessibility expert. But if a lot of people
Yeah,
uses the design system or the component library, I mean, it's to their benefit to contribute it back to make it more
yeah,
accessible, and then everybody who uses it benefits from it. So I think there is
yeah.
definitely that whole open source thing that can play a big role here as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know I'm glad you mentioned open source because we've been kind of talking about it a bit, but like we have three topics. And also I just want to be mindful of your time. It's 2:23 we're scheduled for 7 minutes left here, but I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about like open access and like, all right, I guess we know what open source is. Uh, in your mind, like before we get to open access, like open web, what does that mean to you when we say open web?
Well, from when I talk about it, I pretty much talk about web standards. So the idea
Okay.
um, that you are using open web standards
Mm-hmm.
to build your things. Um, Preferring that, let me rephrase it that way. Preferring open web standards first, and
Okay.
then adding whatever else you need on top of that when you need it, and be mindful of the when you need it part. Do you
Okay.
really need it, kind of thing? So it's, you know, it's pretty much that, and then just the open web in the sense of trying to avoid walled gardens. I think the open
Okay.
access plays into that as well. I'm loving the indie web movement that's really gaining
Okay.
steam right now. I'm digging it. I feel like a big old hypocrite because my blog is ancient and not being updated, and I keep building it locally, and I'm like, just push it live, because you know, I can't be talking about this stuff and then my blog is just sitting there gathering digital
Yeah.
dust. Um, but yeah, I think I've overwhelmed myself with it a little bit. So I'm doing this new thing where I'm now gonna publish it in three phases, and the first phase is just HTML, no
Okay.
CSS, no JavaScript, and then I'm gonna make it pretty with CSS, and then I'm gonna add whatever I need to. If there's a need for JavaScript, then sprinkle that on top a little bit, as just a
Okay.
way to, I don't know, a learning experience, but also just see how it goes. Like, what
Yeah.
does a website look like if you just use HTML? What can you do with just HTML? Let's see.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Now my blog is currently using 11D, but I am a fan of Astro. So like
Mm,
I got nerd sniped into converting my blog to Astro, but I got so far because like the it's not complicated, but like I pull in my dev 2 posts with a GitHub action, and that's where
Oh.
I use it like a headless CMS basically. And so like there's
Mm-hmm.
integrations and stuff where like I got a lot of the Astro stuff working and content collections, and then it was that last mile where I just ran out of gas. And so, and 11D is a very capable system, so I have a feeling unless something really compelling causes me to switch to Astro, I'm just gonna leave it, I think. And I have to update. There's the newer 11D and stuff, but essentially my blog is all static except for like I have like
Mm-hmm.
embeds. So like for example, like a YouTube embed.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
everything else is like images. I have a code pen embed and stuff. So those are iframes and stuff. But the Nikki T.live, which is my site for my stream and where I have my schedule and stuff, I was like, I needed this site. I was like, I'm building it in Astro because I'm a big fan of Astro as well.
Yeah, love it.
And I actually love building in Astro components. Like I'm a fan of React. I love JSX. I like the ergonomics of JSX, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's smart what they did. They use Astro.props. They bring in all these familiar things that like when I
Yeah.
started writing stuff, I didn't really have to think too much about it, and it was also it's not JSX. They have their single file component kind of structure, but
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty I found it pretty easy to grok. I was like, okay, I know the
Yeah.
code fences are server side JavaScript. This is my page essentially, and then you could have style if you want, or you use Tailwind or something. But I really like what the Astro team's doing, and
Mm.
I don't know, and they've got a lot of interesting stuff. They revealed at the Montreal meetup. Some of it's coming out now. Like some of it's more like React specific. Like they have their own flavor of server actions and stuff, which is something
Mm-hmm.
newer. But like if that's something you need, they support that. So it's kind of interesting and kind of similar to what you were talking about, like the enhance with the WASM and bringing in a PHP and stuff. Ben Holmes, who works at Astro, has these like experimental branches where he's like integrating Astro with like PHP and stuff, so, and like Rails.
Mm.
So I'm just curious to see where those things go.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
but they're just doing a lot of great work over there, I think. So just shout out to open
Mm-hmm.
source, open web, and open source. Um, and yeah, I guess uh, I'm good to go over the time if you are, but
Yeah, sure.
I have a meeting in about 30 minutes, but I'm good until then. I guess like open access. So like we talked about open web being standards and not walled gardens. So like for people longer in the tooth, something like CompuServe or AOL was definitely walled garden. Even stuff like Facebook is a walled garden to some degree. You can see some content, but not all of it. Um, I understand for business reasons, but you know, it's,
Mm-hmm.
it, but to your point, like there's a big move with the indie web, and there's like, I know my old coworker Michael Cole was a big fan of web mentions, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like
Yeah.
I haven't used that. I actually have to look into that to see how that's implemented. That's basically people can comment in an open way throughout the web and they propagate, or
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
is okay.
Essentially, yeah. It's almost like pinging one another and then reacting to you receive a ping and you update your comment section saying this thing was mentioned over there and you link back to it.
Yeah.
Um, but the whole activity pub thing is really interesting. Like I still need to play with that as well. I think that's one of the reasons
Okay.
why I'm so slow on my blog because I want to integrate all that stuff.
Okay.
Um, and like the whole nerd snipe thing, so get that. You like see something, oh, I want to do that. Oh, I want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I get that, and then the day you just like are excited about a lot of things, and then you're like, okay, now I have to do something
Yeah.
practical here. Um,
Yeah.
so I think the activity pub stuff is interesting. I think the working group in the W3C that's experimenting or while exploring the whole social web aspect from a standards perspective, I think that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, a lot of services like Mastodon and all that is like spearheading that and kind of
Yeah.
showing what is possible by leaning on these open platforms, open protocols, all these kinds of things. So I think with open access for me, it can be a kind of broad term. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically like way back when the internet just came out, like some people had the internet, some people didn't.
Yeah.
And the people who didn't were losing out. Like, the rest of the world was moving forward and evolving and, being really creative and all that stuff. And the other people just kind of had to sit around and see it happen and they couldn't really participate. And I think some of it is also this idea of participation in the web. I think that is the thing with the indie web is there's not, and having your own blog is like, you don't have to ask permission to do something
Mm-hmm.
on your blog. If you want to redesign, you can redesign it. If you want to just have it HTML, you can just have it HTML. There's nobody that can tell you can't do it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but then I think AI for a moment had this thing where I was concerned that it's going to be the have and the have-nots again.
Okay.
Um, Open source is helping a lot there, but I am a little scared of open source AI just because of the nature of it, right? It's open
Mm-hmm.
source AI, which means all the things that the corporate companies are doing to make it safer for us to use, like
Yeah.
those things you can take those guardrails off if it's open.
Yeah.
So I think that the open source initiative is working on something regarding to AI and how do we do this in a responsible way, because I think you need a special kind of open source license here.
Mm-hmm.
um, it being completely open is a little dangerous. What will all these open ones allow you to do that could potentially, if it falls in the wrong hands? And the thing is that the wrong hands can be teenagers that, I listened to a podcast about some of these things where they're using these nudified tools
Okay.
to take photos of their classmates, and you can put two and two together what they do with that.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, your commercial AIs won't allow you to do that because it has guardrails. But if you have a system deployed somewhere that is the guardrails removed, it's going to just
Yeah.
generate whatever you tell it to generate. So that is where the open access thing gets a little tricky, because I
Mm-hmm.
do advocate for open all the things, but
Yeah.
some things are dangerous to just throw open and say have at it, because you could do harm, you could do real harm with that. But I don't think, I think maybe AI has focused this problem or highlighted this problem to some extent,
Yeah.
but it's always been a concern because people have always said, well, if it's truly open and you can use it for whatever and there's no limitation of use, then
Mm-hmm.
you could use this thing as a terrorist. You could use this thing as a hacker. You could use this thing. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. You could. You totally could.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess that's the open source in general. Obviously, AI is something a little more accelerated, and there's a lot more things you can do with it. And uh, just a couple comments from the chat. Uh, Todd Libby joined us, so we were talking about you before,
hey.
Todd, and uh, uh, Skulk mentioned you landed a new role, I think. So congrats if you did. And yeah, Todd saying walled gardens and paywall and the like are accessibility barriers.
Yep.
And he said, we're working in the W3C to minimize harm on the web for WCAG 3 example, for example, just
Oh,
like that. And yeah, it's the same old story about any kind of technology or some kind of knowledge. It's an amazing thing and somebody's always going to do something bad with it. Even like, to be pretty frank, even if with these guardrails and like initiatives are put in place, bad actors will still find a
oh
way.
yeah.
But to your point, I think it's a good idea still. Esty was asking, she's a little confused. Open source AI, what on earth could that be? Like, she says, what do you mean? AI is open source or open source built with AI? I think, are you referring more to like open source large language models? Is that what you're getting at? And
Yeah. If you think Hugging Face, pretty much everything that's on there, the model weights, everything is open sourced. So anybody
mm-hmm.
can take that, run it on your local machine, or deploy it somewhere and give people access to it. But there's
Yeah.
no constraints about, like, you need to have these guardrails in place. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
telling you have to do that. The license doesn't prohibit you from tinkering with it as much as you like and making it
Yeah.
available to other people to do with it as they like. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. People are always gonna be there's always gonna be bad actors, which sucks, but that's just that's just life. What was I gonna say?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but like, there's so many, yeah, the terrorists, anything like bad can come of it. But you know, I don't know. It's a double-sided. What's the? I'm not saying the expression right, but it's, you know, there's good and bad with all these things always. But hopefully, in the long term, more good than bad. But
Hmm.
yeah, because I was listening to a not podcast, but a uh, a book on AI. Not yesterday, Saturday, while I was doing some chores. It's let me find the name. It's called Co-Intelligence: Living and Working with AI. It's by Ethan Mollick. I was just listening to the ebook,
Oh.
but like all the big companies are aware of like the ethics aspect and like putting those guardrails on, like you said. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in general, but also in open source, because it's a
Hmm.
tough it's a tough problem too, because like, I mean, I think there's some clear ones that like, okay, you really can't do this with this kind of thing, but like different cultures have different like somebody might be totally okay with like nudity, somebody's like it's a big no-no, like. And I'm not saying
Hmm.
in terms of what you were, not the use case you were mentioning, but I just mean in general,
Yeah.
like, like if the LLM is returning me, beautiful nude images that are photography, it's something that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
It's not, but it's not pornography. But like another culture just might be like, you like no, no, no at all. Like, and
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
always say, humans are complex. We were
Oh yeah.
complex. But
Definitely. Like I think like Miriam said the whole thing about humans is messy.
yeah,
That's true. We are
yeah,
messy.
yeah.
We're still figuring all
It's
this stuff out, man.
Yeah, I think it's good to be messy though. It's we're complex
Yeah.
beings, but I don't know. That said, like everything we kind of talked about, like I kind of come back to this all the time, but I know the job market's tough right now, but I still think like if you can get into the space, it's such a great time to be a developer. Like there's so many new advancements. We talked about like the HTML and CSS
Hmm.
improvements, which just in general make things better for the web. And it's super exciting times with all things AI. Obviously, there's some downsides as we've kind of noted, but just so many amazing things out there. And yeah, open source, like I honestly, I'm super thankful for open source. Like
Mm.
I worked in closed source up until well, professionally up until 2020. I was contributing to open source between like, I started in like, I think it was 2014, but like ever since I've like taken on roles in open source, it's like, or contributing to open source, it just changed my whole career arc, to be honest, for the good.
Hmm. Yeah.
And like,
Hmm.
and if I can, like, I'm ideally gonna try and work in open source as long as I can. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
and it's just, I don't know. There's something I like about just working out in the open. I think once you get past that, like, oh no, people are gonna see my ugly code or whatever, like you just kind of have to, if you can tear that band-aid off, if you can get past that barrier, I think it's just beneficial. ST has
Yeah.
another question. Um, oh, so Estes, I think she's referring to my comment. I feel like in 5 years might be the worst time to do anything tech related apart from open source for me. I don't know if you're referring to AI stuff. I definitely think like any industrial revolution, like, to be honest, the jobs will be lost. Like, it's inevitable. But I think if we can leverage those tools, like, it can only make you do your job better, potentially. Uh, maybe not always, but I don't know if that's what you're referring to, SD. But yeah, it's the same thing. Like, But it also, like, I've heard a lot of people say it might create just a different category of jobs too, though, right? Um, just
Hmm.
like, it's not exactly the same thing, but like when horses were around until, like, the Model T Ford came out, everybody was upset, like, I can't use my horse and buggy anymore now, but now new jobs were created, drivers and so on, so like things change, but I think some things do will get lost along the way. Okay, so Estes is saying a normal tech job seems more challenging. I'm not sure what you mean exactly by normal tech job, because I guess normal could be subjective, but um and while Este's just responding to that, Todd says, I used to tell myself when I started coding on stream, when thinking how people were going to criticize things, I'd say to myself, it doesn't matter what people think. It's none of my business, and move on. Helped me get to a point where I saw a critical comment, I would just brush it off and keep going. Yeah, that's the thing. People are always going to criticize, and there's definitely like good and bad feedback. Like somebody just saying
Hmm.
like, hey Skulk, that's shit what you're doing. Like that's not helpful at
Yeah.
all. But hey Skulk,
Hmm.
this is great what you're doing, but I think this could be improved. Like definitely how you deliver a message. Yeah. Okay. Um. Okay. So Este's saying normal people. I'm still not understanding Este, but maybe you can let me know in Discord later. Um.
Um,
Cool. Cool.
no, no, for sure. But I think that I definitely struggled with that when I was started at Mozilla because you're surrounded by all these like great talent. I mean, some of these people I was reading their blogs every day, and now I'm working
Yeah.
alongside
Yeah.
them, and I have to open a pull request and ask them for review. It was definitely scary, but I think there we were a bunch of really good folks, so it wasn't a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think code of conducts is that's why they're so important in open source, is so that
Yeah.
when
Totally.
somebody comes in and says your work is shit, you can say, you
Yeah.
clearly didn't read the code of conduct. That's not how we work here. That's not how we collaborate here. You can't collaborate effectively if you're just being a douchebag. Let's
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
be civil and constructive. Otherwise,
Yeah.
find a different project.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, no, but I think
You
also
yeah.
I think one of the other things is maybe with the AI thing, maybe what ST might mean, is I think a lot of people might feel like working in tech, like a day job, would be very much focused on implementing AI features and
Mm-hmm.
chasing the big dollar, whereas in open source you can do stuff that's more for your heart. Um, and I find some companies do a good job of finding a balance between those two, where you can do stuff that makes you feel good and makes you feel that your work's meaningful, but then balance that out with, well, we also have to do this because it's a business and we need to, if not grow, at least not die, because then also you lose your job, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it's finding that balance, and maybe open source can give you that balance where you can do some stuff in the open that makes you feel good and feels like meaningful work, and then it makes
Mm-hmm.
your day job a little bit more palatable. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. I misunderstood the normal people before. You meant people not working in open source. Yeah. Gotcha. Uh, it also depends where you work. Like even if you're not working in open source, like I worked at Autodesk at one point, and to be honest, the software I was working on was a little boring. It was project management software for like
Mm,
movie industries and like gaming. So like think like a Disney or a Netflix as a client. So like big stuff, but at the end of the day, the actual software to me was not exciting at all. But I had
yeah,
other
yeah.
coworkers, like an old coworker of mine from another place. He worked on this amazing program called 3D Studio Max, where you like it's like
Yeah.
like architectural stuff. Like, and he really enjoyed it, and I think that sounds really cool. So like, it could be too SD that maybe it's just you haven't found exactly what you want to work on. Like there's I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so but like I think definitely open source is amazing, but I still think there's even other jobs out there that aren't necessarily open source that are can still be fulfilling and interesting. It's you know uh, uh, having said that, I've typically just been lucky to work with people I like hanging out with. Like I already know
Yeah.
from just chatting with you, Skulk, that I could 100% work with you, no problem. Like I would like love hanging out. Uh, and that definitely helps a job too. But if
Yeah.
what you're working on is interesting too, that's amazing. Like I like what we're doing
Hmm.
at Open Sauce. I loved working at Dev 2 and like building out a community platform. Netlify was interesting for me because it was open source still, and working on
Hmm.
frameworks, which I'd never really done before. I'd only been like a consumer of a framework, so
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
stuff. But yeah, it just yeah, okay. And Sty's just saying it's like AI being used by people to bring someone down even more. In my experience, I've always had to prove that I'm good enough every minute, every day. With the AI picture, it seems
Mm.
like it makes it even harder. I, yeah, I honestly don't know what to say there, and I'm sorry that you've had to go through that to prove yourself. I, I, sh- I should say too, like I'm saying a lot of this, and I always have to remind myself I'm a white guy in tech. Like, there's a million things that I
Hmm.
don't have to worry about, and same for you probably. So like I should acknowledge that because there's just so much stuff I don't even have to worry about, and which sucks for like in general for everybody. But yeah, actually heard SD that people have found that leveraging AI can help up the game for you too, though. But I don't know. I don't want to get too into the weeds right now because we're close to time here. But happy to chat at some point, SC. And Todd saying Nick and I could work together, but there would be who has the better lobster roll debates. That's from Todd. Yeah, yeah. Small context there. Todd is definitely the lobster roll king, but there's a difference between Maine lobster, which is where he's from. It's a they're both on the Atlantic, but it's soft shelled lobster, so it's different. Like you can literally peel off the shell, whereas the Atlantic, like closer to where I am, or like the Maritimes of Canada, it's hard shelled, and so you have to literally like crack it open with like
Yeah.
it's a little rougher, but both great. But yeah, we can have that debate though if you want to, Todd. Um, cool. Um, I think probably now is probably a good time to wrap things up. I honestly, Schalk, I could talk to you like literally the rest of the day, but I do have a meeting in about 13 minutes, and I do need to take a small break. But this has
Yeah,
honestly
get it.
been amazing chatting, and if you ever want to hang out again, I'd love to chat again.
Yeah,
This has
sure
been
thing.
it was kind of funny. Like before the stream, I said like we're not doing any live coding today, so sometimes it only goes an hour, and it's like we've spilled over an hour and a half. So like clear clearly there was stuff to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. Really
Yeah,
enjoyed
cool.
it.
I'm just gonna drop some links where people can give you a follow, and thanks everybody for all the questions in the chat and the comments. It's much appreciated, and yeah, I'm gonna head out to a meeting shortly. And Sculpt, thanks again so much. If you don't mind just hanging on for 1 second,
Yeah,
everybody
sure thing.
else, I'll be live streaming tomorrow, doing some work. But Wednesday, I'm hanging out with my old coworker Eduardo Bucas from Netlify. We're gonna be going through all these new Netlify primitives that the platform has. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check that out. And yeah, if with that, enjoy the day, folks. And yeah, Sculpt, just hold on one sec. Hey, everybody.